He stood, pressing his palm to his chest, and felt his cheeks flush. Even recalling his former life, the young man acknowledged that she remained the most desirable heroine of all possible. Back then, reality and fiction had intertwined in his mind, but his feelings for her never waned. A girl with a soft, almost weightless smile appeared before him. He carefully noted her calm, warm gaze directed directly at him. Meanwhile, in her presence, his breathing became uneven, though outwardly he tried to maintain composure. The name Engage Hazard, abbreviated as Enhazage, seemed to echo in the air, and the very mention of the term underscored its special significance. Afterward, the realization of the name's significance became even more deeply ingrained in the teenager's thoughts. The story then shifted focus to a mobile romantic RPG with elements of chat, adventure, and comedy. Players were invited to meet a variety of charming and unusual heroines and build relationships with them. It became clear that the project was built on a combination of light humor and romance. Then the silhouette of a crowned figure appeared against the shining background. The narrative announced that the future ruler must secure the best bride in the world, otherwise he would not ascend the throne. This idea lent weight and drama to the proceedings. After this, the viewer was introduced to Harold Welly de Hawaldzi in the form of a formal portrait. His name and status were emphasized by special design, and his serious expression hinted at his high rank. This reinforced the sense of his importance. Meanwhile, they showed the castle of the Kingdom of Dehawals, one of the greatest powers among the Western countries. Its massive walls and majestic towers symbolized the state's might. The atmosphere of grandeur heightened the sense of historical gravity. However, the following description undermined the ideal image. The prince was characterized as treacherous, pathetic, and easily swayed by the powerful. He was called the worst of the worst, unworthy of his position. This reputation hung heavily over him. The young man covered his face with his hand and acknowledged that they were talking about him. He'd only realized this morning, and the discovery had transformed his perception of his own identity. Everything inside him seemed to shift from its usual place. When he opened his eyes, memories of his past life came flooding back. It happened just like in the stories he'd once read about reincarnation in another world. After that, there was no doubt left. He was living a second life. He remembered his former name, Tachibana Haru. Although he had been a university student, socializing with his peers had been difficult for him. This lack of confidence gradually isolated him from those around him. An image formed in his mind. He stood apart, his face hidden in shadow, while three of his peers walked together in the distance. Then the feeling of alienation became especially clear. He realized he had never been able to become part of their circle. Later, he saw himself in the darkness, hunched over a telephone. The virtual two-dimensional world became a refuge from his worries and unresolved problems. It was there that he sought solace in the illusion of control. His hand held a smartphone, the Engage Hazard logo glowing on the screen. The moment of his first meeting with Enhaza was particularly vivid in his memory. That's when it all began. The dark-haired youth admitted he'd been overly carried away. He'd spent a considerable amount of money trying to become Harold, and even wondered what was wrong with the character. However, the desire to try on the role proved stronger than common sense. The narrative recalled the fate of the original hero, envy of the protagonist, conspiracy, failed rebellion, and execution. The image of a lifeless body with ink stains on its back emphasized the tragic ending. It was an outcome he feared repeating. Now his gaze became firm and focused. He decided that such a fate must not befall him again. Then, a determination to change the course of events was born in his heart. At the same time, he realized he was only about 13 years old now. There were almost 3 years left before the main story began, and that gave him ample time to prepare. This small amount of time turned into an opportunity. A cloudy sky stretched above the stage, and the thought was clear. He knew everything about the world of Enhaza. This knowledge was becoming his greatest advantage. He possessed information no one else possessed. And finally, he came to the conclusion that, with this understanding, he was obliged to act. If he knew the future, then it could be rewritten. Then, before him, lay the opportunity to change his fate and transform his cursed role into a path to personal power. He clenched his fists and firmly declared to himself that he would survive. The young prince refused to accept a fate that would lead to an inglorious death and vowed not to let events continue as they had been. At the same time, a girl stood in the dimly lit room, surrounded by soft shadows. She was resolutely thinking that she had to save that very person, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Harold hesitated, wondering if the path he'd chosen was truly the best one. While he was hesitating, a voice off-camera called out to him, trying to get his attention. Soon, two maids addressed him with obvious enthusiasm as, "Your Highness." They assured him that his new outfit suited him perfectly and that he looked better than ever. However, the heir himself felt uneasy. He silently admitted that he had always worn black and now felt out of place in unfamiliar colors, as if he had betrayed his own image. Afterwards, someone flatly rejected the proposed outfit, insisting on darker colors. According to the interviewee, black was the shade that accentuated his best features far better than the others. Nevertheless, he paused to gaze at the object in his palm and noted that it looked quite respectable. At that moment, doubts briefly gave way to calm appreciation, but suddenly the young man started and turned, noticing someone's hasty address. He was addressed as Your Highness and urgently asked to accept something offered to him. He glanced at the handkerchief in the girl's hand and felt slightly embarrassed. The words about this handkerchief hung in the air, unfinished. Then he asked if she was okay and gently offered to take a tissue so she wouldn't cry anymore. She stood before him, her eyes downcast and slightly flushed, as if hesitant to look up. Alone with his thoughts, the prince pondered the mysterious child who had appeared in his life. He regretted not asking her name and tried to understand what had happened. At that moment, the dark-haired youth responded animatedly to Prince Harold's address. His reaction betrayed excitement, as if what was happening held special significance. The king then warmly greeted the heir and expressed relief that he had finally arrived. The atmosphere of the meeting became more solemn. The dark-haired young man bowed his head and apologized for being late, addressing his father with respect and a hint of trepidation. His tone betrayed both respect and inner tension. After this, Alexandra addressed the prince politely, noting how honored she was to meet him. Her manner of speech was impeccably polite. Then her full name was announced: Alexandra of the House of Chevalier, daughter of Duke Chevalier, head of the greatest noble family in the kingdom of Dehawals. The girl's origins underscored her high status. The narrative then reminded her that she was one of the heroines of Engage Hazard, and this was confirmed by a piece of paper held in someone's hand. Thus, reality once again intersected with the game world. Despite her early appearance in the story, her stats were considered the worst: an overall rank of C, attack of B, and firepower of C. These numbers looked modest compared to other characters. In the main storyline, she was known as the Ice Villainess. She was stern and often cold toward the other heroines. The results of the user popularity poll were finally revealed, with Alexandra placing last. Due to her image, she wasn't particularly popular with players, which only reinforced her controversial reputation. On stage, Alexandra knelt under the watchful eye of two guards. A voice from outside coldly warned that if she did not choose her romantic path, both she and her father would be executed for conspiring against the crown. At that moment, she mentally wondered if anyone would finally notice her. She understood that a certain choice would unlock one of the protagonist's illustrations, and she pondered the feelings this frame evoked. With a sincere expression, she recalled how just one phrase, spoken from the heart, had managed to captivate her. It was enough to crack the ice around her soul. Meanwhile, the young man clenched his fist to his chest and vowed to stop being a worthless, villainous prince. He resolved to survive in this world at all costs and change the role he had been forced into. A sly confidence appeared in his gaze. He was thinking that everything that was happening would turn out to be beneficial for both him and her if he played the game correctly. The king laughed warmly, noticing that the heir was struck by Alexandra's dazzling beauty. The young aristocrat quickly apologized, trying to hide his awkwardness. Afterwards, the cheerful crowned woman suggested they take advantage of the opportunity to have tea in the courtyard. The proposal sounded casual, like a casual social initiative. At the garden table, Alexandra sensibly remarked that they needed to mend their relationship now to avoid a worse future. Harold listened attentively to every word, without interrupting, but suddenly her name was called. The girl winced, realizing that this was precisely the outcome she had been trying to avoid. The prince then admitted that he had not yet been a worthy heir. He understood that she did not think highly of him and emphasized that she had every right to refuse the engagement, despite the circumstances. Alexandra, maintaining her focus, asked what exactly he intended to say. Her tone betrayed a demand for clarity. He hastily asked for 3 years to prove he was capable of becoming a man worthy of her respect. His words rang with genuine determination. The young aristocrat then fell to his knees and declared that he would personally ask His Majesty to break off the engagement if, after the expiration of the term, he remained a disappointment. With a tense face, he again begged for 3 years. His request sounded insistent, almost desperate. Alexandra solemnly declared that she would decide for herself whether his feelings were sincere. She wasn't going to take his word for it. After this, the girl declared that she would strike with full force, and all he had to do was withstand it and defend himself. Her address to Your Highness was firm, without a shadow of a doubt. He reacted with shock. Unable to believe the situation had taken such a turn, it seemed almost absurd to him. However, she asked whether his recent resolve should be dismissed as mere window dressing. Her gaze was stern, brooking no evasiveness. Nevertheless, Alexandra warmly thanked him for his willingness. Meanwhile, Harold took a stance, raising his shield and drawing his sword, combining caution with firmness of purpose. And finally, he remembered her words about simply blocking the attack. Convincing himself that everything would go well, the prince prepared to take the blow and prove the seriousness of his intentions. He considered that he might not be able to strike back, but he was perfectly capable of defending himself. Then the young man vowed to withstand at least one attack and not retreat. Alexandra assumed a confident stance and calmly declared herself ready to begin. Her posture and gaze clearly demonstrated her determination to see the inspection through to the end. The next moment, she noticed the strange hue of her own eyes. She wondered if they had turned scarlet, though she hadn't noticed that before. Meanwhile, he watched the scene unfold with obvious confusion. He couldn't recall anything similar, and the prince couldn't understand why everything was unfolding differently than expected. Someone remarked that His Highness's resolve was undeniable and clearly visible. These words sounded like an acknowledgement of his seriousness. After this, Alexandra introduced herself formally and expressed her anticipation of the heights Harold would reach in 3 years. Her tone held a mixture of hope and challenge. He responded with a sly smile, quietly chuckling and noting that this was only the first step, making it clear that he intended to go further. Then the heir confidently promised that within 3 years he would definitely accomplish something significant. His voice was firm, unwavering. Alexandra smiled with genuine joy, thinking that everything had worked out exactly as she had hoped. From that very day, she had been in love with His Highness and now truly considered herself his bride. The girl confidently declared that her secret engagement request had been entirely justified. The young man, hearing this, widened his eyes, clearly not expecting such a confession. Meanwhile, the maid reminded the young mistress of the need to maintain prudence, despite the smooth progress of her relationship with Prince Harold. Joy should not cloud judgment. The blonde asked for a little freedom in expressing her feelings and insisted that he was able to understand her state. Her words sounded like a plea for leniency. Harold, squinting with sly confidence, acknowledged there was some truth to this but left the thought unfinished. His pause hinted at an underlying thought. Alexandra suddenly covered her mouth with her gloved hands when someone noticed her face turning visibly red. The words caught her off guard. The maid explained sternly that the blush had only appeared briefly during the duel. Her voice held a hint of irritated displeasure. The dark-haired tutor warned that if Harold discovered the true nature of her eyes, the engagement would be immediately broken. Hearing this, the blonde anxiously protested that she did not wish for such an outcome. The maid sternly advised her mistress to be more careful and kind towards the prince. In response, she nervously noted that she found it incredibly difficult to smile at him. The video then showed the girl sitting with a large bell over her head, as if under symbolic punishment. The young man noted that her social skills were significantly below average and that she often avoided social situations, especially for her age. Alexandra lowered her gaze and admitted she was aware of her isolation. There was a hint of unease in her admission. And finally, she quietly added that she was aware of the gossip behind her back. People called her icy or compared her to a fairy tale villain, and these words resonated painfully in her soul, although she tried not to show it. Harold reflected with mischievous confidence that he had never imagined the prince would be able to parry his blow so skillfully. A glimmer of satisfaction flitted through his thoughts. The result had exceeded his expectations. Alexandra calmly confirmed that the attack had been enhanced by the dragon's blessing. With a slight thoughtful smile, she elaborated as if stating the obvious. Meanwhile, he subtly shifted the point of contact between the blades, adjusting it to the sword's trajectory. This dissipated the force of the blow, and the block was successful. The girl smiled softly, adding that she didn't think he even realized how it had happened. There was a hint of implied praise in her voice. Then she remembered how he had pulled her out of danger. In her opinion, no one else was more suited to the role of her companion than this heir. A voice from the outside stated that only Prince Harold could have been involved. A close-up of a glove clutching a patterned object emphasized the gravity of the statement. The young man sat cross-legged and considered his next steps. He understood that Enhaza had a combat mode, but in his current state, death awaited him. Harold admitted that it was he who suggested the 3-year sentence to Alexandra. However, deep down, he knew he was simply trying to look impressive. The narrative revealed that his magical attack and defense were high. However, the rest of his stats were distributed haphazardly, creating a developmental imbalance. It also turned out that, despite his generally light-oriented abilities, the heir himself actually possessed a dark attribute. This fact sharply contrasted him with the expectations of those around him. Despite his weak physical attributes, he was proud that his skill points had been maxed out at 999. This was the number that allowed him to activate special abilities. He judged there was more than enough potential. All that remained was to figure out how Tachibana Haru would train the new herald. With this in mind, he decided to begin by searching for a suitable weapon. His expression remained calm, but a steadfast focus appeared in his eyes. Soon, a maid named Marion approached the prince, introducing herself and announcing that she was now responsible for his escort. Her tone was formal. The dark-haired maid clarified her name as Marion Cialar. She reiterated that she would personally oversee His Highness. Some reacted with shock, wondering why Marion, who should be serving Wilfred, was here as the heroine. The inconsistency aroused suspicion. Harold approached Alexandra with an offer to trust him with any matter. Then he quietly thanked her as if cementing their alliance. The dark-haired woman whispered that this was a rare misfortune and, clicking her heels, stepped forward, saying that it was time to act. Her appearance added tension. He bluntly admitted to being a man prone to bowing down to the powerful. Moreover, he found it convenient to be seen as a worthless, villainous prince. And finally, he outlined his goal, to live quietly next to his fiancée Alexandra, without attracting the attention of other women. Their intertwined fingers and confident gazes spoke of their desire to preserve this quiet union at any cost. Harold calmly stated that in 3 years, Marion would have to transfer to Wilfred's service. The maid herself stood before him imperturbably, maintaining impeccable posture and an impassive expression. Then the heir suddenly clutched his chest and, with obvious tension in his voice, asked not to be subjected to excessive trials. The gesture betrayed more weariness than theatricality. The narrative hinted briefly that part of his past in the world of Unhausa had never been revealed. Hidden behind the game's script were episodes that none of the players knew about. A scene conjured up in his mind, a boy standing in the background, while a woman hugged a man in front. From an early age, he'd been constantly compared to his exemplary older brothers, and the comparison was rarely to his advantage. The now mature youth realized with alarm that he was unable to use the symbol of his royal lineage or any other special skills. Shadows with cold gazes seemed to gather behind him, intensifying the feeling of pressure. Despite being labeled a mediocrity, he desperately tried to catch up with his older heirs. He strove to earn his parents' approval, even though he was consumed by insecurity. One day, a woman told him point-blank that if he couldn't replace the first prince, then at least he shouldn't interfere. These words sounded like a death sentence, devoid of consolation. On his birthday, his own mother uttered even more painful words, which he still recalled with a heavy heart. Even now, it felt as if something inside him was still being torn apart. Awakening from his memories, Harold sat up in bed in his striped pajamas and awkwardly asked for the wash basin. His voice was quieter than usual, as if he was still weighed down by the old words. A week had passed since Marion had become his servant, but she had barely performed her duties. He couldn't help but wonder if the nickname they had bestowed upon him, the worthless, villainous prince, had been too harsh. Ever since his memories of his past life returned, he had been training daily. However, doubts persisted as to whether such efforts would truly lead to increased strength. Unlike the Unhausa game world, there was no leveling system here. Progression wasn't measured numerically, making the path forward less predictable. Standing with his sword in hand, he pondered how to increase his magical abilities when his skills were impossible to use. The only thing he could train independently was his physical abilities. He then concluded that there was only one option left, to strengthen himself through a weapon imbued with magical ability. Such a tool could compensate for his weaknesses. My memory told me that in Unhausa, weapons of R rarity and above always had a unique skill. This knowledge gave me hope. He assumed there was bound to be a blade with magical properties among the arsenal. If he could obtain it, he could develop the associated attributes, but he paused for a moment, considering the risk. The tired youth leaned on his sword. Feeling the strain of his training, he decided he had to first push his weak physical abilities to the limit. With a slightly tense smile, he added that such efforts could come in handy in an unforeseen situation. His tone combined caution with inner resolve. Then Harold lunged forward and struck, accompanying the movement with a battle cry. Alexandra watched him with a slight, self-assured grin, clearly unimpressed by what she saw. Under the hail of sparks from the clash of blades, he looked confused and forced to defend himself. Alexandra calmly noted that she hadn't yet seen any noticeable progress. Her confidence remained unshaken. He laughed awkwardly and admitted he was merely copying the movements of someone without talent. There was a hint of self-irony in his voice, but underneath it lay a stubbornness. She responded with a sly smile and offered to assist His Highness with his training. The heir raised his eyebrows in surprise, not expecting such an initiative. Alexandra appeared with a determined expression, and the narrative emphasized that even the weakest heroine was capable of displaying immense strength. This fact shifted expectations. Meanwhile, a maid holding a large sword demonstrated a confident stance. It was said that Marion came from a knightly family and was particularly distinguished by her high physical abilities in Unhausa. Harold began to wonder if training with one of the heroines might give him a real chance to get stronger. The idea seemed risky, but promising. He asked cautiously if this was permissible, a look of doubt crossing his face. The question sounded sincere, without pretense. When practice began, he grimaced with effort, deflecting the attack. Alexandra calmly noted that the pressure from her was extremely intense. Gripping his sword hilt tighter, he mentally repeated that if he didn't cope now, he could forget about survival. An inner voice demanded endurance. At one point, he allowed himself a confident smirk and noted that her defense wasn't flawless. It sounded like a challenge. However, the woman with the blade responded sarcastically, reminding everyone that it was no surprise that everyone had long ago given up on him. Her words were laced with provocation. She asked him if it wasn't humiliating to hear such things. His gaze was sharp, almost merciless. Beaten and covered in sweat, he looked tired, and those around him, without hesitation, recognized him as weak and talentless, incapable of using a single skill. Despite this, the young man gripped his sword until his knuckles turned white and declared that he had no right to surrender. Stubbornness became his strength. With a slight bruise on his face, he added that even if Tachibana Haru and the former herald were deprived of the gift, that was no reason to remain inactive. He intended to act differently. The dark-haired maid watched him closely and noted that he still had some energy left. Her conclusion sounded almost surprising. Suddenly, another dark-haired girl pressed a knife to the frightened maid's chest, sharply demanding that she stop and not cross the line. The situation escalated. A confident woman introduced herself as Monica Ashton, His Highness's new personal maid. Another maid nearby anxiously apologized, hesitant to intervene. Monica smiled slightly, reacting to the surprise exclamation from off-camera. Her calm seemed defiant. Harold, taken aback, asked why she wasn't serving Alexandra as expected. His voice was filled with confusion. The dark-haired girl firmly ordered the discussion to cease, declaring she had heard nothing of such agreements. Her tone made it clear the conversation was over. He offered, with sly confidence, to settle the matter directly with the head maid. The smile on his face suggested he'd already calculated the outcome of such a conversation. The girl with the bow tried to speak cheerfully, assuring him that the new job would be pleasant. However, a slight worry, mixed with hope, was evident in her gaze. A maid in uniform hurried across the threshold, determined to immediately check the situation. Her short snort betrayed her displeasure, but her steps remained confident. Meanwhile, Harold informed Alexandra that he intended to accompany her as her personal maid after the wedding. He advised her to get used to his presence beforehand, reminding her that it was the Ojo-sama's decision. The dark-haired girl smiled warmly and asked him to take care of her from now on. Her words sounded sincere and calm. He quietly agreed, knowing they were counting on him. Their fingers barely touched, cementing a silent trust. However, the heir suddenly grabbed Alexandra by the head and sharply demanded an explanation. She flinched, clearly not expecting such a direct attack. Nearby, a maid, clutching her chest, loudly lamented, unable to understand why she had been drawn into this. Her voice trembled with confusion and irritation. She soon firmly declared that all manifestations of disrespect towards Prince Harold had already been reported. There was a firmness in her tone. The ponytailed girl winced painfully when she heard that her services were no longer required. The news clearly stung. The maid hastily insisted that His Highness return to his chambers immediately to have his wounds treated. Her concern was genuine and undisguised. The young man remembered that Monica was the first maid who had ever shown genuine concern for him. Nearby, another maid with a tray smiled softly, creating an atmosphere of calm. Covered in sweat from nervousness, he asked Monica to wait and hesitantly said her name. The words didn't come to him right away. Meanwhile, Alexandra and two maids carefully examined the room. One declared that nothing had been found, the other confirmed it, and the girl herself insisted that it was indeed empty. One of the maids, slightly sweating, rested her cheek on her palm and remarked that for such a young princess, she expected to see at least one revealing item. There was surprise in her voice. Then she suggested that what she was looking for might be elsewhere. Her gaze became thoughtful and cautious. Harold snapped that there was no other place and added that Monica would get what she needed herself. Alexandra quickly asked him to stop doing anything unnecessary. He sighed heavily and said that he was now counting on her. These words sounded like an admission of dependence. The dark-haired girl politely agreed and asked him to take care of her in the future. Her manner of speech remained impeccably restrained. Finally, the maid apologized for interrupting the meal and conveyed an invitation from Prince Cardus's valet to dinner that evening. The news promised new events. Before his memories of his former life returned, Harold desperately sought his mother's approval. He hung on her every word and even courted Cardus, joyfully clinging to his older brother's back as if hoping to become indispensable to him. Deep down, he believed that Cardus would certainly find a use for him and keep him around if he saw any use. This conviction gave meaning to his abject devotion. Now, with a confident if slightly forced smile, the heir agreed to join the invitation. He decided to announce his participation, reasoning that a refusal might look more suspicious than an agreement. Later, he struggled to count to 1,000 during a training session. When the final number was called and 998 and 999 remained within his target, the young man collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted. It had been quite some time since he'd begun his independent studies. Adjusting his collar, he thoughtfully noted how the days were blurring into a monotonous series of efforts. Despite his efforts and the promise he made to Alexandra, he saw no tangible progress. Her soft smile, recalled in his mind, suddenly left him frozen in indecision. When she praised him for his efforts, he became embarrassed and began to ask haltingly why she treated him this way. The blush on his face betrayed his confusion. Alexandra calmly reminded them that it had been a month since their last meeting. Since they were engaged, she decided to come in person to avoid unwanted rumors and preserve their reputation. She then gently advised him to be more mindful of such details. He admitted he hadn't even considered the consequences of such behavior. Harold clutched his head, irritated, admitting his own stupidity. He'd promised to become a worthy man, but in doing so, he'd almost forgotten about the one for whom he'd made that promise. Meanwhile, the girl, standing by the brick wall, reflected that even if she felt nervous around someone, she had to make the first move. Without initiative, nothing would change. She thoughtfully inquired how far the Chevalier household was from the capital. Her gaze betrayed interest and a hint of caution. He explained that because of his engagement, he had moved to a city mansion closer to the capital. A hint of surprise flickered across his face at the very question. Then she gently offered to visit the castle whenever he wished to see her. Her words sounded sincere and without a hint of playfulness. Harold was truly taken aback, realizing that Alexandra might be showing a slight but personal interest in him. He hadn't expected such openness from her. He hastened to dispel any possible misunderstanding, emphasizing that they were meeting only twice. She calmly reminded him that the number of meetings did not negate their status. Noticing fresh marks of sword training, he pointed them out, noting that she appeared to have been practicing right before their conversation. His observation hadn't escaped her. He awkwardly explained that the weather had simply inspired him to try his luck. In response, he was asked if it had really been a coincidence. Alexandra quietly admitted that she trains for recognition and approval, though she wished she could be more direct about it. Her words conveyed a hidden sincerity. And finally, he thought again that no matter how hard he tried in the past or the future, his efforts might go unnoticed. Behind the two figures, a man in dark clothing stood motionless, a silent reminder of the trials to come. A month ago, she spoke quietly and without unnecessary emotion. He was confused, not immediately understanding where she was leading, and with a tense gaze, he asked her what exactly she meant. Now Harold looked uneasy again when Alexandra reminded him of his promise. She asked him point blank if he was making every effort to keep it. The young man honestly admitted his lack of talent and that he hadn't even tried to change before. Nevertheless, he promised to work hard for the next 3 years to remain her fiancé, and she listened silently, without interrupting. When the conversation turned to training, he blushed and cautiously asked if he could be of assistance. His voice betrayed uncertainty, mixed with a desire to prove himself. He added that what he's doing now once seemed like an unattainable dream, yet he emphasized that he's doing it primarily for her sake. Alexandra gently asked if he doubted her abilities. Her hands were folded across her chest, and her tone was calm but slightly wary. In response, he quickly grabbed her by the shoulders and firmly declared that he hadn't even intended it that way. His reaction was too quick to hide his excitement. Then, realizing the abruptness of the gesture, he raised his hands and awkwardly explained that he was training primarily for himself. He tried to explain his motives to avoid misunderstandings. The girl quietly admitted that she felt awkward wasting his time, especially if he had to change his plans for her. There was a modest note of concern in her words. However, she immediately added confidently that there was nothing to worry about, as she was Prince Harold's fiancée. This statement sounded like a reminder of mutual responsibility. He smiled sheepishly, thanked her, and asked with a hint of playfulness if that was indeed the case. There was a hint of an attempt to diffuse the tension in his tone. Alexandra suggested a small duel right then and there. The suggestion caught him off guard. He asked again if it was really just a light fight. His movements showed his excitement. The woman with the sword confidently noted that he had managed to repel the previous attack. She added that she expected him to grow in strength much further. Alexandra firmly ordered him to get ready. His face at that moment betrayed a mixture of anxiety and readiness. The scene gave way to a tranquil view of a garden with trees and lanterns. Someone's voice addressed Prince Harold, signaling the beginning of a new conversation. Alexandra, settling into a chair, said she was looking forward to the next day's meeting. Harold and the uniformed maid listened with slight smiles. The heir, holding his sword, asked with a nervous smile if anything was planned for tomorrow. The question was voiced cautiously. She confirmed that she would come again the next day and reminded them that they only had 3 years left. Not a single day should be wasted. He tensely asked if time was truly so short, or if he still had 3 years ahead of him. His doubt reflected a fear of missing out on changing his destiny. He mused that if they didn't become stronger within 3 years, they would face a future as bleak as Harold's fate in the game. This thought sounded like a warning that couldn't be dismissed. Meanwhile, a dark-haired woman in a maid's dress turned to Monica and asked her directly if she understood the gravity of the situation. Her gaze was stern and demanding. The maid confidently declared that she would have His Highness fully restored by morning. The young man, blushing slightly, listened to her words with noticeable excitement. Then, with feigned confidence, he added that, of course, the treatment would be carried out in the most direct and intimate manner. His tone betrayed an attempt to conceal his embarrassment. Alexandra, blushing, sharply rebuked the speaker for his excessive freedom. Her irritation was obvious and required no explanation. After this, the dark-haired youth hastened to inform her that it would be best to return home, as His Highness had been invited to dinner with Prince Cardus and would be delayed. He clutched his stomach as if in discomfort. However, the dark-haired woman abruptly interrupted the blonde, declaring that she was still there and would not be ignored. Her voice brooked no argument. At that moment, Harold flinched as his name was urgently called. The tension instantly reflected in his posture. Alexandra firmly demanded that he detail the upcoming dinner. After a short pause, he reluctantly agreed. The maid insistently reminded the princess of the need to prepare, but she responded sharply, betraying impatience. Her words betrayed irritation. Later, Harold bowed deeply, expressing sincere regret. The weight of the upcoming conversation was evident on his face. He added with a slight smile that he had been waiting, as his interlocutor had been a bit late. His folded hands betrayed a hidden caution. The dark-haired youth suddenly realized the resolute blonde's true status. He was the first prince of the Dehawals kingdom, Cardus Vel Dehawals. This realization made him wary. Cardus presented himself as a capable successor, already participating in the management of state affairs. His position seemed almost unassailable. One of those present explained that it was the figure in the crown who was now considered the leading contender for the throne. The others listened respectfully. The fair-haired youth with his cold gaze appeared distant and lacking in softness. His seriousness seemed almost heartless. Alexandra and Harold watched as this man confidently approached, as if descending from the heights of power. The narrative noted that he was the one capable of blocking the protagonist's path with the Dehawalsi coat of arms. The girl mentally returned to the times when she continued to serve her brother, hoping through this to gain her mother's recognition. He stood next to her with impeccable confidence. Harold wondered why, after so many years, his brother had suddenly decided to invite him to dinner. This had never happened before, and it made him wary. Finally, the fair-haired, gloved man asked directly about the engagement to the daughter of House Chevalier. He then calmly explained that the invitation was made in honor of this event. He responded with a cold, calculating gaze, instantly grasping the hidden meaning of what was happening. A clear picture formed in his mind. Someone intended to use him as a bridge to support. Meanwhile, Alexandra reflected that the nobility remained the most influential force in the kingdom. With the House of Chevalier behind her, the path to the throne would be significantly easier for any contender. Harold firmly declared that he no longer intended to curry favor with his interlocutor, adding that the latter could only regret the loss of his former submissiveness. The girl mentioned Prince Cardus with noticeable nervousness, and the fair-haired man listened with a serious, unmoving expression. His reaction was restrained but attentive. At that moment, a cheerful young man greeted Harold and warmly congratulated him on his engagement. He smiled openly and held his hand to his chest, demonstrating the sincerity of the gesture. The dark-haired heir found himself facing a smiling blonde man, Raphael Vel Dehawals. He sat at a luxurious table in the formal hall, confident and calm. Alexandra smiled softly, resting her chin on her clasped hands. However, the narrative emphasized that behind Raphael's outward ease lay a calculating mind. A scene flashed through his mind, where the boy listened intently to a long-haired woman. She explained that he had no desire for the throne, but despised the first queen for the humiliation she had inflicted on his mother, and so he opposed her son, Cardus. Harold silently noted that, despite his status as the younger and useless brother, he felt no hostility toward him at the moment. He hoped that if he treaded carefully, everything would proceed smoothly. Alexandra asked Raphael, her gaze direct, if he really had only come to congratulate Harold. Her tone was challenging. Then she playfully asked if her older brother had another goal, her expression a mixture of lightness and insight. Harold, looking tense, confirmed that his fiancée was the daughter of the Duke of Chevalier. Alexandra added animatedly that she herself intended to find a suitable ally. Raphael chuckled, calling the whole thing a farce, and admitted he'd heard about it. She then revealed that the king and queen had told her of his proposal to the Duke of Chevalier, which had been politely declined. Alexandra confirmed that such an episode had indeed taken place, turning to Harold. He looked displeased, while the third man at the table remained silent. Raphael smiled faintly, noting that had he known the outcome in advance, he would have acted much more decisively. His calm seemed dangerous. The younger brother asked bluntly if the elder intended to try to make young Madame Chevalier his bride and break off their current engagement. The answer was short and affirmative. Harold could barely contain his irritation, realizing that for them, brides were merely a means to power. Such logic disgusted him. Alexandra called out to him anxiously, noticing the change in his mood. He leaned forward, inquiring about what had happened, and the tension between them became palpable. The heir apologized with an awkward smile, explaining that he was feeling unwell and had to leave dinner early. His words sounded like an attempt to save face. Alexandra also apologized, despite the invitation, and sat down next to him. Harold listened to her seriously, realizing that this evening was only the beginning of a more complex game. He calmly reflected on how the returned memories had changed his view of the world. What had previously seemed natural and self-evident now seemed alien and unfamiliar. The dark-haired youth walked behind, watching the other two walk ahead without looking back. Despite everything he'd been through, he felt compelled to choose his own path. He was determined not to become someone who used women as a means to power. Even if such behavior was considered normal, it was unacceptable to him. A bright smile appeared on his face, and the narrative reminded him that in Genhaza, in order to be accepted by his mother and brother, he had to play someone else's role. This was a condition, without which he would simply be ignored. Meanwhile, she clenched her hands tightly, aware that any blow to her beloved target would inevitably injure Alexandra as well. In her thoughts, anxiety mingled with determination. He clutched the pendant tightly to his chest and vowed to never let anything like that happen again. His intention was unwavering. At that moment, he finally decided to defy fate. This decision concerned not only his own survival, but something greater than his own interests. Alexandra, holding back tears, promised herself that she would never let her beloved see such an expression of pain on her face again. She strove to become stronger for him. The young man then announced his return. The surprise of those around him intensified when it was revealed that he was the fourth prince, Wilfred Wella de Howells, the protagonist of Engage Hazard, who was called the one rejected by heaven. Harold silently acknowledged that he had been unfair to Wilfred in the past and had used his origins to cover up his weaknesses. He realized that his own inadequacy had served as a convenient excuse. When Alexandra announced that she had come to congratulate him on his engagement, he looked at her warily, unsure of her intentions. Meanwhile, Wilfred warmly congratulated his brother and reaffirmed his support. His calm agreement sounded unexpectedly sincere. Harold briefly considered whether reconciliation was possible, but the idea seemed too unrealistic. The old grievances seemed too deep. One of the maids nervously suggested that Marion had become Wilfred's maid, which would explain her earlier anger. Another calmly confirmed the guess. Alexandra noticed that the attitude toward the tainted Prince Wilfred was even harsher than toward herself. The shadows of ill-wishers seemed to gather behind her. The girl reflected with a slight smile that her current situation couldn't be called favorable. However, she couldn't understand why the anxiety wouldn't leave her. Harold noticed that her behavior around Wilfred was different from how it was around him. He wondered if this was because the heroine was naturally drawn to the protagonist. She remembered that she owed Marion a thank you. Her voice was soft and thoughtful. Alexandra sincerely thanked Harold for helping her become his personal maid, even at the cost of someone else's position. He responded with a grateful smile, recognizing the value of her words. And finally, he understood the big picture. Alexandra stood next to another character, silently acknowledging that perhaps she wasn't destined to find common ground with the protagonist, no matter how perfect he seemed to others. He breathed heavily, unable to shake the thought that everything that had happened had actually happened. His heart pounded, as if reminding him that there was no turning back. Alexandra firmly declared that the House of Chevalier must answer for the insult to the prince, emphasizing the decline in status of a noble servant. Harold abruptly interrupted her, demanding that such talk cease immediately. Alex calmly explained that the best way to cement their engagement was to strengthen His Highness as soon as possible. Meanwhile, another girl sat casually to the side, observing the discussion. Later, he lay down, staring at the ceiling with a worried expression. In the game world, everything could be solved with money, but here, reality defied such simplifications. She thoughtfully suggested focusing on finding a more effective way to develop his strength and choosing a weapon suited to his position. The priority was obvious. Harold, holding a massive sword, smiled awkwardly and explained that he'd previously used a spear, but was now leaning toward a shield. The decision wasn't an immediate one. After a month of reflection, she too came to a conclusion and quietly declared that her choice was the shield. There was confidence in her voice. It was explained that in Inhaza, this type of weapon was ideal for him, as it required minimal defense and focused on magical attacks. He recalled how he'd managed to parry Alexandra's blow, and that had been the decisive moment. She called him her most precious ally. She smiled softly, approving of the choice, and expressed confidence that one day His Highness would become known as an impregnable fortress. Harold looked at her intently, and she promised to make him stronger. A quiet understanding developed between them. Alexandra declared the break over with determination, clutching her shield tightly. Her determination left no doubt. He cheerfully declared that shield training would begin immediately, while the young man behind him silently hoped for fate's leniency. Soon Harold was back on the ground, breathing heavily, and managed to squeeze out a thank you. His strength was ebbing faster than he would have liked. Alexandra, catching her breath, noted that progress had become obvious over the past 3 months. Now, no ordinary enemy should be able to injure His Highness with his level of protection. He recalled how he went through grueling trials every day, running from demonic beasts, climbing the palace tower, even strange exercises underwater. Collapsing to the ground again, he admitted that he was only able to block 20% of attacks and felt on the verge of exhaustion. She encouraged him with a gentle smile, urging him to be more confident. Her calm was reassuring. He defiantly declared that, even if only in a fifth of cases, his blade could be deflected by no one but Monica of House Chevalier. His words laced with a mixture of pride and weariness. But then, with a weary sigh, he began to doubt whether this was truly the case. His voice grew quieter, as if reality had once again reminded him of its own limitations. He hesitated for a moment, but then assured her he was fine. She cautiously asked if daily training was really okay, reminding him that neglecting his lessons could lead to problems. Harold, with a serious expression, warned against underestimating the formally energetic college student. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, betraying the underlying tension. Alexandra looked a little worried, but there was still hope in her gaze. Folding her hands, she said she would believe him if he was so sure. After some time, she suggested ending the training for the day. The exhausted heir reluctantly agreed and asked to be looked after tomorrow as well. She announced that she was going to change and turned slightly as she spoke. There was a hint of weariness in her movements. Blushing and feeling hot, she thought that if it weren't for the bib, the situation would have been different. At that moment, a surprised cry came from behind. The maid suddenly pressed herself against the stunned young man from behind and, mockingly remarking that the evening had turned out to be productive, made him stutter in surprise. Harold hastened to assure Alexandra that he hadn't seen anything. She, embarrassed, retorted that such excuses usually came from the guilty. Meanwhile, someone politely addressed the princess while pouring tea and apologized for the intrusion. The atmosphere gradually softened. Sitting at the table with a cup in front of him, he confidently declared his intention to find a shield that would truly suit him. His voice was resolute. A girl with long hair asked if he was sure of his choice. He confirmed it while the maid carefully poured tea. Then he firmly declared that the pitch-black shield of Casparega was the only worthy option for him. The name sounded like an oath. She explained that this item could only be obtained by defeating the demonic beast Casparagius on Morn Island. Even 1,000 soldiers couldn't defeat such an adversary, so the young man begged her to abandon the plan for his own safety. However, Harold didn't back down and reiterated that Casparega was his only choice. He simply saw no other shield. The illustration showed the rare black shield of Casparagium, available to those with the dark attribute. Its shape inspired both fear and awe. An image of a ferocious black beast, growling menacingly, appeared nearby. It explained that loot was only possible after defeating this demi-boss. He explained that the shield could project dark claws at a distance, with an instantly lethal effect, and also attract dropped objects. Alexandra listened without interrupting. He acknowledged that his request was nearly impossible to fulfill, yet he emphasized that success was impossible without their help. His words rang with honesty. Alexandra, worried, repeated that her anxiety was solely out of concern for him. Her voice remained calm but firm. Closing her eyes and gathering her courage, she agreed to not attempt the impossible and to strictly follow orders in battle. Her decision meant a willingness to go to the end, but with a cold, calculating spirit. Harold glanced around and noted that they had arrived on Morn Island. Behind him, Alexandra and the maid stood silently, attentive and calm. The girl confidently declared that the boss's lair was located right here. The young man asked if they should move forward, while another companion quietly watched them. Suddenly, the black cat, looking furious, warned that anyone who stepped further would be killed. His threat was harsh and without a shadow of a doubt. Harold doubted that this tiny creature was the real Casparega. Alexandra insisted that the real thing would look like a huge lion, and the maid added that such a cute kitten could not possibly be the monster. However, the black cat defiantly declared that the boss was incredibly strong and that everyone trembled in fear before him. There was a hint of pride in his voice. Harold asked in surprise if it was really Casparega in front of them. The cat responded indignantly, asking what exactly he was trying to find out. The little creature then crossed its paws and, with a satisfied expression, acknowledged its discovery. It finished with a playful "Nia," as if mocking their confusion. Two girls immediately pounced on the young man with questions. One accused him of being a demonic beast, a huge lion. The other demanded to know what he knew about her. The atmosphere grew tense. A serious black cat was asked directly about the Black Shield, while another cat enthusiastically praised Casparega's strength and awesomeness. The contradictory words only added to the confusion. The cat, with a sly smile, declared that if they fulfilled his request, he would not withhold the necessary information. His tone hinted at a deal. Harold, picking up the little animal, demanded to know who the thief was who had invaded his territory, assuring him it wouldn't be difficult to figure out. His voice was full of confidence. However, he immediately and firmly refrained from rash actions when the creature insistently asked if he wanted the shield. The decision was not an easy one. The narrative reminded us that the demonic beast had long since become a terrifying legend, yet its true form had almost never been seen. The black cat sat motionless, and the voice explained that if he was forced to turn to people for help, it meant the situation was out of control. Alexandra declared that her own life and the lives of those dear to her were most important to her. The maid supported her, noting that they were not obligated to put the needs of a demonic beast above their own. Nevertheless, both girls confidently declared that no monster would pose a threat as long as they were nearby. One suggested first finding out what kind of person the intruder was, which surprised the young man. He assured them that if they failed, they would retreat immediately. The small black creature calmly replied that she had no objection to such a plan. He soon reported that the target was very close, describing it as a snow-white figure, standing out sharply against the gloomy surroundings. The contrast was striking. Before them stood the remains of a sacred beast, a once divine messenger known as the raid boss, gluttonous beast Henwen. The sight of this creature was terrifying. Alexandra hastily ordered Prince Harold to retreat immediately. He froze, surprised and tense, realizing the situation could spiral out of control at any moment. Harold lunged forward, vowing to avenge his mother. At that very moment, a huge, stitched-together monster attacked him from behind, and Alexandra couldn't hide her surprise. He found himself behind the agitated young man, who was worried about leaving Casparega and losing his chance to obtain the shield. The girl next to him gently held his hand while he considered his last resort. The thought flashed through their minds that it would have been easier to give in and go with the flow, as the old Harold had once done. But it was precisely their reluctance to repeat that weakness that prevented them from retreating. Harold angrily ordered the monster to remove its filthy paw, calling it a vile boar. It stood before him with defiant determination. The enormous pig charged, shaking the ground, while the man in heels held his ground, shouting a warning. The situation was escalating. She coldly remarked that what she saw was not courage, but recklessness. Her words betrayed concern, masked by sternness. Then she smiled softly and admitted that she appreciated his naive, kind, and awkward nature in her own way. However, she didn't know how to deal with it. The maid sighed heavily, lamenting her fate of serving such a master, while Alexandra looked confidently at Harold, and he, embarrassed, held onto her sleeve. The black cat looked up with a glint in his eyes when his name, Casparega, was called. His gaze became attentive. Harold enthusiastically proposed joining forces and crushing the enemy together. Beside him, Alexandra responded with a calm smile. He stepped forward with a cry that it was their turn, and the two black cats seemed to support him, encouraging him to continue. He charged, shield raised, and the cat leaped alongside him, while a voice from the side noted the weight of Henven's blows. Every step was an effort. The man in the pig mask noticed that Alexandra's lightning-fast strikes were incomparably faster than the slow lunges they were facing. The contrast was stark. Harold convinced himself that all he had to do was endure the blow. If he could create a window, victory would be a reality. Alexandra calmly noted that the monster's attack had slowed and prepared to counterattack, while the maid agreed and took up a position on the other side, pinning the enemy between them. The girl called out anxiously to Prince Harold, and behind her, a maid declared that she would distract the enemy. Their actions were coordinated. Alexandra quickly asked if he was okay. He winced in pain and admitted that his gear was already at its limits. Deep down, he knew that even if he managed to repel the attack, he wouldn't be able to withstand its force. Then the name of the Black Shield of Casparega surfaced in his thoughts as his last hope. He turned to the black cat, demanding to know where the shield was. His voice was insistent. With a slight blush, he thought that with this weapon he could defeat Henven. Nearby, a maid struggled to hold her sword while another girl desperately called for Monica, and the battle was entering its decisive phase. The dark-haired youth called out desperately to Kasparega. The black cat, visibly alarmed, tried to object but hesitated, as if hesitant to finish. Surrounded by a vortex of energy, the little beast stubbornly declared that its loyalty was unaffected by any shield. A hesitant assent followed, sounding more forced than sincere. Harold suddenly noticed something tiny and exclaimed that it was barely bigger than a smartphone. His voice was a mixture of surprise and alarm. He examined the object carefully and understood why Alexandra had hesitated to show it. Unlike her mother, who possessed immense power, she was still a child with a limited supply of mana, and this was the maximum she could handle. The black cat asked in surprise what mana was, and the dark-haired young man standing behind him looked no less confused. Harold realized why she was so hesitant. Understanding, coupled with mild surprise, crossed his face. The cat with the pendant around its neck continued to look stunned, while the young man again pondered the meaning of the mysterious term. It was explained that in Enhazai, stats were determined by HP and SP, as well as physical and magical attack and defense stats. The concept of mana as we know it didn't exist at all. When asked if humans could use mana, Harold bewilderedly denied it, claiming that he had nothing of the sort. He suddenly turned around at the urgent call, his gaze flickering with surprise and concern. She calmly explained that mana is a force inherent to every living being and unique in its nature. Without it, it is impossible to receive a blessing. Harold, his face still slightly marred by the recent struggle, suddenly realized something important. It seemed to him that the other man was familiar with the concept as well. It was explained that in this world, SP is essentially mana, and skills are considered blessings. The system differed only in terminology. He smiled slyly and asked if it was possible to transfer mana to another. Addressing Kasparega, he was clearly hinting at a plan. The cat admitted, surprised, that he was capable of receiving mana from people. However, there was a note of caution in his voice. The talking beast explained that creating a black shield like the one his mother wielded required a colossal amount of mana. If it were taken from a human, they would immediately lose consciousness. Harold asked with a grin if she was worried about him, his tone provocatively light. The small dark creature snorted angrily, wondering why this man even existed. The irritation was almost palpable. Nevertheless, Harold, with a confident, if slightly tense, smile, offered to take as much of his mana as needed. He said this without hesitation. Finally, he hastily ordered Kasparega to act faster. The cat, stunned by his resolve, asked if he had heard the warnings and froze, doubting the consequences of such a move. Harold, flushed and determined, looked around and asked if everything was okay. Behind him, Alexandra and another girl were calling his name anxiously. He firmly declared that he would take Henwen's blows and then ordered his companions to take advantage of the opportunity and deal with the pig. One of them confidently replied that she would leave it to herself. He admired what he saw with enthusiasm, examining the stitched monster or object as if he were discovering something truly remarkable. It was explained that in Enhaza, any weapon except a shield adds its attack power to a character's stats when equipped. This rule was the foundation of the combat system. It was further clarified that the Black Shield's defensive stats were comparable to those of an SSR heroine, and if the wielder shared the same attribute, the effect was doubled. The shield became a near-absolute defense. Harold, with a sly smile, explained that this was precisely why he was able to withstand Henven's blows. The dirt and scratches on his face only emphasized his tenacity. Alexandra and her companion rushed forward while he watched from below. The girl realized that this movement was familiar and had a special meaning. She sharply ordered everyone to take cover behind her immediately, while Harold rushed towards them with a threatening expression on his face. Clenching his fist, he shouted that he would protect them both and stepped forward with firm confidence. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shake. Later, he asked with a confident grin how they liked his performance, adding that he'd managed to withstand the pressure. There was a hint of bravado in his tone. She praised Prince Harold for his excellent work. Her smile, partially hidden, betrayed her genuine pride. Alexandra raised her sword confidently and declared that she would handle the rest. He remained behind, watching her. She furiously promised to drench in blood the one who dared torment her fiancé. Her gaze blazed with unwavering determination. He was startled to notice the unusual gleam in her eyes and realized that there was more to them than just anger. She announced it was time to teach a lesson, clutching the heavy weapon tightly. From behind her, he ordered action immediately. Later, Harold, standing by the wall, declared that the time had come to avenge his mother. A half-eaten apple lay on the ground nearby, a silent symbol of the past. The cat reminded him that the power within belonged only to him, and couldn't he feel it himself? He wondered how that was possible. Harold commanded the dark creature to rush forward and snatch the target, his face filled with steely determination. It was explained that Kaspergea's unique Black Shield ability, abduction, allowed the player to steal everything from a target. It was a power capable of turning the tide of battle. And finally, Harold confidently placed his palms on the ground, declaring that from this moment everything would begin. Behind him, Alexandra and the two maids watched his steps, understanding that their journey was entering a new phase. The dark-haired man calmly asked the little creature if it remembered its promise. The feline creature nodded gravely, declaring it had fulfilled its promise, and quietly called its mother, as if confirming its decision. The cat, visibly nervous, quickly denied knowing anything extraneous. Two voices out of sight demanded clarification and reminded him of the word, their intonations laced with alarm and bewilderment. The black cat sternly remarked that without his mana, it would be impossible to deal with a demonic beast like Henwen. No one could maintain his current form alone. Harold responded with a confident grin and said she must be feeling uneasy now. He added that it was time to end the fight, while Alexandra looked worried in the background. The dark-furred animal looked at him with surprise and concern, and the young man sighed heavily, lamenting that he had barely found the perfect ally when everything went differently. Harold looked around, checking to see if anyone else was nearby, and wondered about the need for mana. The cat suddenly offered to be his partner. He confidently declared that he had no other weapons he could wield properly. Then he asked if that meant they could become stronger together. The cat, with a serious expression, emphasized that he was useless without him, but was still willing to help. In response, the young man, slightly embarrassed, called him partner. Harold firmly declared that he was counting on him from now on. They exchanged a symbolic fist bump, cementing their alliance. Alexandra turned to Monica with enthusiasm, asking if she had seen the prince's majestic image. Her voice was filled with genuine pride. The maid calmly remarked that if her mistress had taken the matter seriously from the start, the enemy would have been defeated instantly. There was neither malice nor admiration in her words, only a sober assessment. Alexandra calmly replied that he could handle it himself if he wanted to. Her tone betrayed respect for Harold's efforts. She thought for a moment and realized there was no madness in his eyes. It all happened because he had managed to absorb the final blow. She was overwhelmed by emotion. His Highness, still in his infancy, had challenged Henwen, who was superior to him in strength. It was impressive. The woman recalled that fighting Henwen usually required the royal army. Knowing that His Highness had managed to defeat him, explained why the Ojo-sama admired him so much, and the other woman quietly agreed. Alexandra thought with a slight smile that His Highness and Kaspergea were now acting in concert. A barely perceptible, almost dark, laughter echoed in her thoughts. The dark-haired woman sighed and reminded her that she had been crazy about him at the very beginning. Her question was a cautious test of his feelings. Harold confidently called the black cat his partner. Alexandra, slightly embarrassed, hastened to remind him that even with the cat, he was still connected to her. She quietly remembered that 7 years had already passed since His Highness had saved her. A soft smile appeared on her lips. The narrative recalled that the kingdom of Dehawaltz was founded by a dragon and remains under its protection. The image of a majestic dragon encircling the castle symbolized ancient protection and blessing. She calmly explained that the dragon had long favored House Chevalier. He countered that his patronage extended only to the current royal line, the Dehawaltz family. Centuries have passed since the kingdom's founding, and only a few initiates know the true history. Most consider the ancient legends to be nothing more than beautiful tales. The maid remarked that the only true dragon of the Chevalier family was the young mistress herself. She listened to this with a soft, barely perceptible smile during tea. Harold recalled how he had once given Ojo-sama a handkerchief with a dragon design, and she had accepted it without hesitation. It was as if an invisible sign of agreement had passed between them. It was explained that after the lady accepted the gift, Prince Harold actually sought the dragon's blessing for her. Thus, it was decided that their destinies would intertwine. The maid added that His Highness likely didn't even realize the significance of that act, and perhaps didn't even remember the headscarf. The real problem was that only the young mistress perceived it as a vow. She smiled softly, covering her face with her fan, and quietly admitted that she was satisfied with everything. Even if this was her personal understanding, she had no intention of abandoning it. The blonde confidently declared that 6 years of waiting had brought her to this moment. Now she would defend His Highness by his side, without retreating. House Chevalier espouses the principle that strength is justice. Only those who stand at the top are granted the sacred blade, the dragon-slaying sword Balmung. Harold admired her tenacity over the years and remembered her vow to become his companion. He understood that neither the current head of the family, nor even Cedric Sama, could change her mind. Alexandra wondered if, after the recent incident, there would be many who would try to exploit His Highness's abilities for their own ends. The danger had now become a reality. With a slight smile, she noted that this was precisely why she had decided to be near him. It was her conscious choice. The dark-haired woman confidently asked to be entrusted with this task. She sat across from the fair-haired girl, maintaining her calm and decisiveness. Harold swore to protect everything he held dear, not just his mistress, but also the one who had once called him priceless, even if it meant risking his life. He noticed that Cass was getting too engrossed in his food, and the contented little creature replied that the treat was meant for cats. There was a hint of nonchalance in his voice. After the battle, Casparega suggested switching to nicknames since they were partners. The young man was surprised, while the girl behind him smiled. Harold, smiling softly as he fed the black cat, mentioned that he and Hal now called each other that. He was gradually getting used to the new name. Alexandra, visibly agitated, struggled with jealousy, thinking that someone else had dared to approach the prince before her, his legal bride. Harold laughed, and she, pouting and seemingly steaming with indignation, heard herself called Xandra. The maid in the background watched with barely concealed amusement. Embarrassed, his palms clasped, he thought about how sweet Alexandra was. Their shared decision to call each other by short names came to mind, as if it were their little secret. Harold, holding the small black cat by the scruff of its neck, called its name. The animal meowed discontentedly, swaying in the air near the table where the plate with cutlery sat. She sat by the window, gazing thoughtfully out into the garden, and quietly repeated that the Marshall family was hosting a reception. Her voice held a mixture of interest and caution. It was explained that the Duke of Marshall descended from the younger brother of the former king, who voluntarily renounced the royal title. Their family retained a special position among the nobility. Alexandra calmly added that, if you trace their origins, they were, in fact, a former royal line. It would have been impolite to refuse the invitation, though Harold listened with noticeable hesitation. One of those present clarified that Frederica, the Marshal's eldest daughter, is one of the heroines of Linhaza and also Cardis's fiancée. This detail heightened the tension. The dark-haired youth panicked and declared that he would definitely run into Cardis there and absolutely did not want to go. His protest sounded almost desperate. He was soon surprised to learn from a little girl that she too had received an invitation, the same one he, Hal-sama, had received. The news took him by surprise. She awkwardly explained that since they were engaged, their future in-laws wanted to see them together. Her words were tinged with timidity. Harold paused and acknowledged that they would be living in the palace as one family in the future. Curiosity was inevitable in such a situation. Alexandra confidently said that participation was necessary and added that she wanted to see for herself what kind of person this Frederica-sama was. Standing against the brick wall with his arms crossed, he thought and came to the conclusion that, in fact, the realization came suddenly. Alexandra was inviting him to a reception and expecting him to be her escort. He froze in surprise. Plucking up his courage, the young man decided to take a risk and awkwardly suggested going with her. He looked visibly embarrassed as he said this, and sweat broke out on his forehead. Later, he mentally chided himself for his strange wording, but Alexandra enthusiastically agreed to go with him. He nodded shyly as she joyfully squeezed his hands. Holding the ribbon in his fingers, he still doubted whether this was appropriate. She announced that she was going to get ready and disappeared down the street. Later, standing next to the carriage, Harold heard someone call him Hal-sama. He blushed as the two men conversed nearby. Alexandra, surrounded by roses, thanked the man who had come for her. Her soft smile seemed especially bright. When he was told that his cuteness was simply killer, he became embarrassed and began to stutter, and Alexandra reacted with a surprised and slightly confused look. She lowered her head, overcome with emotion, while he leaned forward, tired and silent. A tense, heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Harold timidly handed her a small object. Alexandra blushed slightly and said she would keep it as a memento of the evening. Alexandra, blushing slightly, quietly asked Harold if she could open the gift right now. He nodded enthusiastically and quickly agreed, trying to hide his own nervousness. She carefully opened the package and admired the sparkling, exquisitely crafted decoration. Almost in a whisper, she admitted that it was incredibly beautiful. He laughed awkwardly and explained that he chose it because the shade reminded him of the color of her eyes. The words came with some embarrassment. Dressed in an elegant gown, she gently touched her hair and discreetly asked if the look suited her. Her smile combined confidence and hidden anxiety. The dark-haired young man smiled brightly, gave her a thumbs up, and assured her with genuine enthusiasm that everything looked wonderful. His approval was unconditional. With her eyes closed in a tender smile, Alexandra expressed her gratitude for the wonderful hair accessory. Her voice rang with genuine appreciation. Harold timidly asked if she really liked the gift. He admitted he was glad Monica had helped, despite her snide remarks about his taste. Alexandra's smile softened, and he thought that even the worthless, villainous prince had been accepted by her for who he was. This realization warmed him. She reflected that being a bride wasn't enough to explain her feelings. After all, she had already received much more from him than she could have ever expected. He briefly wondered why she'd even agreed to be with him, but quickly laughed it off and didn't dare ask the question out loud. He didn't have the courage. Soon, Alexandra happily announced that they had arrived. He jumped slightly in surprise and confirmed that he was ready. She hesitantly asked him to take her hand. He responded gratefully and gently squeezed her palm. Harold noted that, as expected from the Marshall house, there were many guests. Alexandra glanced around the room, assessing the decor. Wilfred confidently entered the hall in his dress uniform, next to an imperturbable maid. A murmur of surprise spread among the guests. Harold became wary, and Alexandra, taking his arm more tightly, quietly asked if everything was okay with him. He calmly replied that there was no need to engage in conversation now. Even if there were provocations, he intended to ignore them. Standing next to her, he noticed her downcast gaze and quietly said that he understood her state. There was no reproach in his tone. The announcement of the arrival of the first prince, His Highness Cardis, was heard, followed by Frederica Sama. The hall's attention shifted to them. The girl with long dark hair smiled softly, flattered that someone had called her the beautiful heroine of Yanhaza. The praise sounded sincere. Harold teased Hal with a slight grin, hinting at his preferences in people. Hal immediately retorted, astonishedly denying any such suggestion. A woman with long dark hair thanked everyone for honoring their home with their presence that evening. Downstairs, two guests exchanged quiet, surprised glances. Harold politely declined unnecessary formalities and expressed gratitude for the invitation. Alexandra, barely visible next to him, listened silently, maintaining her dignity. Someone respectfully remarked that he was glad to finally meet Alexandra in person. There was genuine affection in their voice. They stood side by side, she bowed slightly, and he again thanked his host for the warm welcome. Their demeanor remained impeccably composed. The dark-haired woman calmly mentioned that she had heard about their engagement, her words betraying interest. Harold was momentarily taken aback, but Alexandra smiled softly and said it was all thanks to him that everything had become possible. He replied that he had managed to get engaged to a truly wonderful girl. She noted with a hint of slyness that after his recent harshness toward Hal, she even felt like teasing him a little. He became visibly nervous. The dark-haired man apologized, explaining he had to greet another guest, and bowed. A woman with a headband stood next to him, while another woman watched from the side laughing. Harold thanked Alexandra sheepishly. She looked at him curiously and asked why. The maid approached Harold with a gentle smile, addressing him as an older brother. He stood confidently, looking forward. He asked what was wrong, and Alexandra explained that she'd simply spotted him from a distance and decided to say hello. A silent observer stood behind her. Harold waved his hand, telling her not to worry about him and to enjoy the evening. However, she asked him to wait a little. He asked if she was interested in the reason for the invitation. She replied that she didn't attach much importance to it. He repeated that she should just enjoy the holiday and said goodbye, and she responded with a short invitation to go with him, calling him by name. Alexandra bowed politely and said she would be stepping out for a moment to freshen up. She asked for forgiveness for her absence. Her mood had clearly changed since Wilfred's arrival. Harold, with a slight smile, wished her to take care of herself and watched her go. He reflected that her true feelings were always difficult to read. This mystery made him uneasy. Alexandra wondered if it was possible the girl would retrace her steps from Tenhaza and fall in love with Wilfred. He looked at her softly, as if oblivious to her anxiety. The dark-haired youth awkwardly called out to Harold, while behind him stood a confident figure with crossed arms. The atmosphere grew tense. Harold noticed that Cardis had intercepted him and turned to Alexandra, asking if she was having a good time. She responded with a slight hesitation, not quite finding her words. Alexandra asked her brother if Wilfredus would be present today. Her voice betrayed genuine curiosity and a desire for confirmation. He confidently explained that the king himself had instructed him to recruit this man into his faction. A calm, self-satisfied smile appeared on the man's lips. Harold winced in surprise when the girl added that His Majesty was concerned about Wilfred's situation and believed that there was no place for him in the palace. She thoughtfully noted that she couldn't openly support him because of her mother. Her words were measured, but there was a hint of tension in them. The interlocutor continued with confidence, explaining that he had been chosen to protect a certain person, and that under his protection no one would dare to harm him. Harold remarked that the current reception was essentially intended to make something public, and mentioned the strange delay in responding to the Marshall family's invitation. The other man expressed surprise, thinking the young man had already guessed everything. Then he leaned closer to Alexandra and quietly said that it was time for his older brother to take care of their unfortunate younger relative. The words sounded almost like a challenge. Harold called out to her nervously, and she immediately asked if he was feeling ill and if everything was okay. He apologized and hesitated, not daring to reveal the truth. The girl clasped her hands, wondering what His Majesty was planning. Her anxiety was palpable even without words. He admitted that he himself did not know the answer, but he was sure that his older brother was well aware of the risk in accepting that man into his ranks. At this, the man smiled broadly, as if he was amused by what was happening, and added that for some reason the person in question felt quite pleased. It was then suggested that a deal had been made with the father, and that accepting this man was a condition of it. Alexandra politely addressed Hal, asking how he intended to deal with this man from now on. Her gaze betrayed a gentle but persistent curiosity. Harold firmly declared that whatever his older brother and that man did was none of his business. He wanted nothing to do with it, now or in the future. Meanwhile, the narrative hinted that the jealousy that had emerged was entirely natural, since Alexandra had feelings for the main character, Wilfred. The young man admitted that he felt sorry for Alexandra if she was trying to intervene, but that was the only thing he could do in the current situation. Then, lost in thought, he asked her point-blank if she had any connection with Wilfred. She remained calm and answered quietly, without losing her composure. He tried to continue, but she suddenly clenched her fists and declared that she hated that man more than anyone in the world, and even endless reprisals would not quench her rage. The look on her face the moment the hero accused Harold came flooding back. Something frightening flashed in her eyes. The woman gently asked Hal-sama if he remembered the day 7 years ago. He asked again in surprise, not understanding what she was getting at. That day, under the open sky, she told him that he had saved her mind, her heart, her dignity, and even her soul. They stood facing each other, holding hands, the wind gently rippling their clothes. Now Alexandra gently suggested they return to the past and recall the story of 7 years ago. She held his hand calmly, as if inviting him to share the memories. Once upon a time, a girl with short hair lay in bed, thinking about her weak body and the monotonous days that passed, while contemplating the world from the window of the main estate. She had no peers to be friends with, so books became her only solace. Reading replaced conversations and walks. Sometimes she imagined herself traveling the world, like the heroines in stories, dancing with a prince amidst glitter and toy wonders. These dreams filled her with a quiet joy. Meanwhile, he awkwardly admitted that he had to take her to the palace. The narrative emphasized that this moment would be a turning point. A nurse informed the man lying in bed that the king had nominated him as a suitor for his highness. Due to his health, the proposal was declined, despite the monarch's insistence, and the man merely sighed heavily. Alexandra recalled with a soft smile how she had traveled to the capital for the first time, filled with excitement. Harold listened, smiling faintly, as she confessed that she was literally seething with anticipation. Before leaving, she timidly asked if the outfit really suited her. Her gaze betrayed uncertainty. The dark-haired girl confidently replied that such was the master's will. Her smile left no room for doubt. However, the young bride was perplexed by the coldness with which she was treated, despite her status as a candidate. A maid passed by without even looking at her. Later, she realized it was a deliberate move by her father, who wanted to prevent the prince from developing any feelings for her. At the time, it all seemed a mystery. When she first saw the palace, she could hardly contain her delight, finding it incredibly beautiful. Harold watched her beaming face from a distance. Meanwhile, the boy, driven by curiosity, quietly slipped away from his father's gaze to look around on his own. She felt like the heroine of her favorite novel and, without thinking, went deeper and deeper into the corridors. However, soon before her stretched only empty passages without end and signs of life. Gradually, anxiety gripped her and she sank to the floor, unable to move. Fear filled her consciousness. At that moment, she wondered why a boy like him was here. A cautious curiosity appeared in her gaze. The girl hesitated, and the young man gently asked if she was lost. His voice was calm. Then Harold extended his hand and offered to show her the way. She looked up at him, still sitting on the floor, and in that gesture, that very memory began. Alexandra hesitated, but still stubbornly declared that she could stand up on her own, even though her knees were trembling treacherously. At that moment, a hand reached out to her, offering support. The young man asked her name, and after a short pause, she quietly replied that her name was Alex. As he was already heading forward, the girl called out to him. He turned around for a moment, but then continued down the corridor without slowing. Then he introduced himself as Harold Wella Dehowaltz, and turned to face her with a slight smile under the vaults of the majestic hall. She remarked that the palace seemed incredibly confusing, and he hummed thoughtfully in response as she walked ahead, looking around. After a while, she sighed and said that it felt like they'd been wandering for over half an hour. Then, about to add something else, she hesitated. Harold calmly noted that they were moving further and further away from the place of their first meeting. The girl looked back anxiously upon hearing this. Squeezing the boy's sleeve, she quietly asked if his father was really where they were going, her voice betraying growing uncertainty. She explained that when her father, His Majesty, met with aristocrats, he usually used the room in front. It sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Harold confidently declared they were somewhere nearby and looked around. Alexandra listened, concentrating on the direction. Suddenly, she tugged at his sleeve, suggesting they go further, but he objected in surprise that the door he needed was at the very end. Holding his hand, she paused in front of the door, hesitating to open it. He, on the contrary, smiled calmly and invited her to go first. Opening the door, she called out to her father with alarm and immediately apologized, extending her hand to him. Almost at the same moment, however, she cried out, addressing Harold as His Highness, amazed at what she saw, while he clenched his fist with determination. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she desperately declared that if anyone was to be hated, it was only herself. Harold responded with a barrage of insults. Meanwhile, the fair-haired young man in the empty corridor desperately asked for the door to be opened, repeating the request over and over again. The girl sobbed, reproaching herself for leaving alone, and in her heart she cursed the prince and everyone involved. Noticing movement outside the window, she quietly whispered that someone was there. Indeed, there was a figure kneeling by the glass. She desperately called for help, asking if anyone could hear her. Then she sank to the floor, unsure what to do as silence fell around her. With her forehead buried in her folded hands, Alexandra thought with despair that perhaps this was how she was destined to die. The girl pounded desperately on the door, begging to be saved because she was locked inside. Outside, a boy anxiously asked if anyone was there. Harold, sweating and tense to the limit, clutched something in his hands and insistently asked her to hold on a little longer. His voice was firm despite his nervousness. Alexandra quickly replied that she understood everything and ran forward, but someone sharply ordered her to move away from the door, not hiding their irritation. A deafening metallic crash, followed by the door shaking, came flooding back to her. The anxiety within her was rapidly growing. She screamed and clung to him tightly in fear, admitting how terrified she was. Harold hugged her and quietly apologized, regretting that he hadn't been able to come to her aid sooner. There was genuine guilt in his voice. A moment later, he carefully asked if she was feeling better. Alexandra quietly replied yes, trying to calm herself. Then he handed her a handkerchief and asked her not to cry anymore, noticing that her face was covered in tears. His tone became softer. She thanked him almost in a whisper, nervously clutching the card in her hands, and he wondered what had really happened. While he listened intently, she haltingly recounted everything that had happened, stumbling and pausing, as if she were reliving that fear. Harold explained gravely that when they entered the room, he was locked inside. The girl looked down, feeling guilty. She remembered the words of that man, spoken then, and he, remaining firm, added that if someone needs to be hated, then let them hate him. Alexandra asked anxiously if he knew anything about Prince Harold. Her eyes were filled with worry. He hesitated, trying to find the words, and admitted that it was not so much that he knew the man well, but that he himself was not sure how to explain everything. Having collected his thoughts, the young man warned her that his words might surprise her. He spoke slowly, as if weighing each phrase. Finally, he awkwardly introduced himself by name, and Alexandra stood stunned, unable to understand how two princes with the same name could exist.